Nick Diaz officially back, ready to resume his UFC fighting career after what was originally a 5-year ban, reduced to an 18-month ban through appeals, and not added to when he decided to smoke with Cheech and Chong.
Tommy Chong.
Cheech and Chong.
Cheech and Chong.
Same thing.
Just say it.
Cheech and Chong.
And Chong.
Cheech and
Do you know what they added to Netflix yesterday?
They did?
Blue Streak.
They did?
They did.
Nice. Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle.
All right.
From Blue Streak.
So we've got this quote from Dana White to throw to, which, and then we'll get into a discussion concerning his potential fights. Nick wants to fight. Nick's ready to go again. I've got to figure that out.
Well, I'm just saying, it's
He's
what
got
he
to figure
said.
it out. That's
saying.
it. And it was a short enough quote that we had to throw up, and not long enough that we couldn't use as a clip because we'll probably get flagged.
Always cite your sources.
I like it.
Cite your sources.
Fox Sports. So we're going to get into the discussion to kind of figure out what could be his next fight. So his brother, as we know, is kind of off the cards at the moment. We're not looking at any Nate Diaz fights, but we always need some Diaz news. Diaz news has to be in the rundown at some point.
I think Diaz news is always a good thing.
Yeah.
Francis, let's look at the lineup for the UFC fights before December 31st and realize what position of leverage, actually not leverage, but what money amounting position that the UFC is about to enter. Because 205 in New York City, we will be there. McGregor versus Alvarez alongside a bunch of other fantastic fights. Wonder Boys fighting Joanna Jędrzejczyk, blah, blah, blah.
Cage side.
206, Cormier gets back in the octagon. 207, Ronda Rousey gets back in the octagon. That closes out the year. So you're telling me that Nick Diaz is going to somewhere end up on 207, maybe? That would be a little bit short notice. But we know the Diaz brothers will do it. But what about 208? You're just going to continue headlining fight after headlining fight that is going to sell no matter what. Start of the new year with the Diaz brother?
208, do we know an official date?
No, I don't know until I think it's like maybe scheduled.
But I mean, that would
it's got to be scheduled for January.
Exactly. Dana White's thinking about considering this momentum and going forward. And Nick Diaz is a prized asset. The Diaz brothers, as much as Dana would not admit it before, I would say, I mean, they've always been there. They've always been gathered a huge audience. But you can't look past the fact that since Nate Diaz's rise, and against Conor McGregor, they're only going to get bigger. They're only going to capitalize further on this.
I was going to mention, the best thing that ever happened to Conor McGregor, Nate, and the Diaz's and Dana White's career was Rafael dos Anjos dropping out of that fight. That was the best thing that ever happened because it's created the Diaz brothers to be money fight, and of course they create so much press. But Francis, continue if you will. Sorry.
We're going to look at to see who they can potentially fight. So we've got a list of...
Well, we have the welterweight rankings.
Yeah, welterweight rankings.
Which is number 8, because that's a nice little, interesting little list of... and again, by the way, these rankings, they don't mean anything, because Dana White knows that they don't mean anything, because it doesn't matter what your ranking is. But the reason I put it up there was because there are 4 guys on this, on these rankings alone that I believe could make for a good fight. Robbie Lawler makes sense. Why, before? Francis? Tweet element number 7, if you will, Mr. Jacorius in the booth. This is back all the way in January. I think Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler 2 would be massive in 2016. What do you think? It's just him saying, I like it. However, whatever, it's been there, it's posted, it's out there in the Twitterverse.
It's on his radar.
It's on his radar. Back to the rankings, because Robbie Lawler 2 would make for a very fun fight. Damian Maia would be another fun fight. Carlos Condit 2 would be another fight. Anderson Silva is another one that I keep throwing out there, but the only problem I think with that is Silva's old, Bod Silva. And then why not a Donald Cerrone? Well, is he interested in fighting a Nick Diaz? That's one I don't know.
I mean, he had a very tough task up against Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz was in his head. I really enjoyed watching that fight. Donald Cerrone was always outside of his comfort zone in that fight. He couldn't really get his combinations. And the attitude that the Diaz brothers have is good when you have someone who's somewhat of a more respectable, traditional fighter. And I say that by all means not to insult the Diaz brothers. I'm saying it as a means like with every kind of source of evil, you do need to have a good on the other side of it to make for a compelling fight. So I would like to see that fight. I think it was enjoyable to see. Nick Diaz, I think anyone who he's going to come up against is going to draw in the numbers. When someone hasn't fought for 18 months,
yeah, it's a money
like you want it, and someone who is an aesthetically pleasing fighter, who's someone that does go out beyond his means and is not afraid of anyone, willing to say or do anything. So I think it's going to be a good fight.
One of the things I find really fascinating is just listen to the number of UFC that he fought. Robbie Lawler was at UFC 47 in 2004.
Jesus Christ.
Lawler was 22. Nick Diaz was 20 years old.
Veteran.
Carlos Condit was back at UFC 143. Donald Cerrone, again, you mentioned UFC 141 between Nate Diaz. And the other one that, at least this list, Conor McGregor's an interesting one, but I don't want to believe that right now just because, and I understand that's what Joe Rogan's been saying, like, if they want the money, make them fight Nick. It just, I know that the Diaz brothers constantly state that they won't fight each other's battles, pretty much, in the octagon itself. So, George St. Pierre is the other one. George St. Pierre, that's the other one they mentioned. But right now, George St. Pierre is going through a massive, massive contract dispute and problem with the UFC. So I don't think anything's going to happen with that soon. But Lawler, Condit, Maia, Cerrone, they're all viable fights. And guess what? Every single one is watchable. I'd preferably like to see Robbie Lawler against them.
But we've seen it, and we know exactly what we're in for.
We know we'll get a good fight.
Yeah, we'll get a good fight no matter what. Two guys standing toe-to-toe with each other. To go back to the Conor one, just to kind of put it to bed straight away, we've already discussed this. Like, you can keep throwing Conor McGregor in there, but Dana White has alternate plans for Conor McGregor. Plans that he may have felt that he kind of steered away from in the past. Plans that actually kind of go along with a more traditional way about, so that he pleases other fighters in the industry, not so much so that he's not going to give McGregor what he wants, but he has to have him defend his belt. He has to have him go back to kind of where Conor McGregor started with, just to prove and continuously prove his worth. McGregor hasn't defended his belt. That's it. He is considered to be one of the best fighters in the industry. I'm a big fan of him, you know that. But I'm not going to sit here and say that he's one of the best pound-for-pound fighters when he hasn't defended his belt yet.
Yeah, there's a long way to go with the pound-for-pound, just because it's the guys who have made their claim for pound-for-pound, doing it for 6, 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah.
We're not saying McGregor can't, but there's just a long way to go.
You have to start by defending your belt.
There's just a long way to go. The last thing I want to throw to is a tweet from Steven Morocco over at MMA Junkie, a good reporter over there. Somewhat relevant factoid: Nick Diaz still owes the NSAC $75,000 from the UFC 183 settlement. He must pay by December 1st or prior to the first fight. This is back in August. I don't think he's made this payment yet. And a big thing with that, I would say, is that we know the Diaz brothers are not the easiest to get to follow order. Protocol. Structure, right? Nothing against that. I think that's what makes them sell so much. They are F
relatable.
The police, they are F the authority, they are fight the power type of guys, and that's fine. That's great for the business. However, he might have to shell over some cash if he wants to make it back fighting in the octagon.
Yeah. Well,
and
we're
by the
excited.
way, he'd make it back in about that quickly.
Oh, no doubt. So maybe it's something that's put into the contract. I'm sure Dana could write it in there to the point that, all right, this is taken care of in a midst. It's taken away from his payday.
Just scrunching up, guys. Just scrunching up on camera.
All right. Let us know what you guys think. Who do you want to see in Nick Diaz's next fight? Make sure to stay tuned. Plenty more UFC coverage coming because, yes, as we mentioned, we are going to UFC 205. Ciao.